They say obsession is harmless. A spark of passion, a fleeting desire, a drive to excel. But obsession is a predator. It creeps in silently, at first almost imperceptibly, until it merges with the mind, twisting perception, bending reality, consuming identity. Ethan was ordinary, meticulously ordinary. A rising architect in a city that demanded perfection. A man who smiled at coworkers, who paid his bills on time, who kept his apartment neat and quiet. But beneath that facade, a current was growing. Subtle at first, a flicker of fascination that would swell into a storm he could neither control nor escape. It began with Ava. She wasn't remarkable, not in any overt way, not in the sense that people turn and stare. But to Ethan she became gravity itself. Every thought he had, every pause in his day, every glance, every shadow of movement was tethered to her. It wasn't love. Love is mutual. Love does not imprison. This was hunger. And hunger, once planted, rarely rests. Ethan first noticed her at an art gallery downtown. The gallery was dim, warm lights highlighting carefully arranged paintings. Polite murmurs floated through the space. Ethan, ostensibly admiring a painting of chaotic brushstrokes, could not look away. She laughed at something small, almost dismissively, yet the sound made the hairs on his neck stand on end. She tilted her head at a painting, thoughtful, unaware of the small, calculating gaze upon her. In that moment, something inside him shifted, a spark that felt electric, dangerous, compelling. He tried to convince himself it was admiration, a passing infatuation, a spark of curiosity. But the image lingered as he walked home, each detail amplifying in his mind. The tilt of her chin, the curve of her smile, the casual flick of her hand. By the time he reached his apartment, he had opened his laptop and scrolled through her social media, memorizing posts, images, snippets of life he hadn't been meant to notice. "I just want to know her," he whispered to himself. "If I can understand her, maybe she'll see me." Obsession often begins this way, a tiny seed, hidden in attention and fascination, masquerading as interest or care. But the mind, once ensnared, does not stop at curiosity. Days bled into weeks. Ethan's apartment slowly transformed from neat and orderly to a shrine of calculated surveillance. Post-it notes appeared on the walls. Strings connected pins on maps, tracing potential routes she might take. Photos were pinned with little notes, reminders of habits, routines, patterns. Even small details became monumental. When she didn't respond to a text, it was no longer simple indifference. It was a test, a betrayal, a challenge to be solved. Each unanswered message, each minor deviation in her behavior warped reality. To Ethan, he was not observing. He was anticipating. Not interacting, he was controlling. Yet he told himself it was normal. He was caring, concerned, attentive. But care, when it becomes obsession, does not soothe. It suffocates. To the world, Ethan remained the perfect image of composure. At work, he was charming, intelligent, and confident. He smiled, he listened, he excelled. He even seemed relaxed, almost carefree. No one suspected the gnawing storm inside him. But every coffee he drank, every step on the sidewalk, every glance in passing, was filtered through the prism of her presence. He replayed conversations, imagined scenarios, calculated outcomes. If I can anticipate her moves, guide her subtly, she will see me, he thought. But the line between foresight and compulsion had already blurred. Control, Ethan would learn, is not a series of actions. It is a lens, a filter through which the entire world becomes secondary to the object of obsession. One evening, the obsession demanded more. Ethan began inserting himself deliberately into her world. Messages were sent under pretexts. Encounters were timed with precision. He arranged to meet her through mutual friends, carefully controlling context, framing interactions to maximize proximity. To Ava, these gestures were small but disquieting. Her smiles faltered. Her casual laughs became strained. And Ethan, trained by fixation, saw it not as discomfort but as a test, a challenge to his devotion. "I just want her to see me," he whispered into the darkness of his apartment. "Eventually she will understand. Obsession is patient. It does not knock, it creeps. And once it enters, it rarely leaves." Weeks passed. Ethan's life narrowed, compressed to the axis of her existence. He monitored friends' interactions, subtly influencing conversations. He intercepted messages, guided narratives, planted himself where she would be. His identity fused with his obsession. Who he had been ceased to exist. What mattered was proximity, awareness, influence, control. Sleep became sporadic, meals were skipped. Each day was catalogued, analyzed, dissected, reframed through the obsessive lens. Every word she spoke, every glance, every movement was proof of interest, or proof of rejection. Reality bent to the shape of his fixation. Obsession is never satiated. Control is never enough. Identity begins to dissolve. One night the weight of his fixation collided with reality. Ava confronted him, not with anger but with fear, exhaustion, and confusion. What are you doing?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why are you always there? Why do you know everything about me?" Ethan froze. The answer was simple yet incomprehensible to anyone outside his mind. "Because I care," he thought. But care had become possession. Love had mutated into domination. Obsession had devoured identity. His apartment, once a refuge, now felt like a cage, but for him, not for her. Every photo, every map, every string connecting pinned locations screamed the truth he had avoided. He was no longer a man. He was the shadow of a desire, a ghost of control, a prisoner of his own compulsion. Days turned into nights, nights into sleepless stretches. The obsession metastasized. He began to see her in dreams and reflections. Each mirror became a screen displaying his worst fears. That she would leave, that she would reject, that she would notice the depth of his control. He stopped answering friends. He stopped sleeping more than a few hours. Meals were forgotten. Conversations at work were filtered through a lens of proximity and surveillance. Even brief interactions with strangers were reframed. Could this person influence her? Could this interaction prevent him from being near her? His mind, once orderly, now functioned only through obsession. Identity had been replaced with a single purpose: to control, to be everywhere she was, to anticipate, to manipulate. And then came the breaking point, the confrontation that crystallized his collapse. "You can't keep doing this," Ava said, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm scared of you." Ethan's chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts collided. Scared, she doesn't understand, he whispered inside. She will see, she will understand. But understanding was no longer the point. It had never been. Obsession had rewritten reality. Desire had become possession. Identity had become a shadow, and the shadow was all that remained. He tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to negotiate reality. But Ava was gone from that constructed universe. She was human, and humans, unlike obsessions, are not controllable. He retreated to his apartment. Walls lined with photos, notes, and strings connecting imagined patterns of her life. Rain tapped against the window, a rhythmic reminder of the world outside, normal and indifferent. He sat in the darkness, staring at the network of obsession he had created. Reflections on the walls and screens danced like ghosts. Each reminder of her presence was also a reminder of his absence. Absence of freedom, absence of identity, absence of the man he had been before fascination became fixation. Obsession is a mirror reflecting not who we are, but who we fear we cannot be. Ethan's descent is a warning. When admiration becomes possession, when care mutates into control, when desire replaces identity, the human mind becomes its own predator. And in the end, the only companion left is the mind itself, echoing endlessly with the sound of a hunger that cannot be satisfied.